have two devices connected to my computer. I connect both of them using the Web USB API. And then one of them is transmitting to the car's receiver, so like jamming it, so that and the other one is listening. So when I'm pressing the key fob to open or lock the car, the receiver is like recording the data in a local file. And while the other one is jamming the car, so it's not opening even though I'm pressing. And then once I have that local file on my computer, I'm able to like load it in the browser and, hit transmit with the antenna that's close to the car's antenna. And because that code has not been used on the car yet, then the car is almost like waiting for that specific code. And then, boom, open the car. I mean, in the way that it works, obviously, I think in a real world scenario, you'd have to be close to the car exactly at the moment when the person, presses on the button. So I know that I do not want to use it to actually hack cars. It was just to show the amount of stuff that you can do with JavaScript, really. That was my only goal. I don't need a car, but yeah. So.
Seemed like a cool thing you could demo at like DEF CON or something.
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 16th episode of the Frontend Masters podcast. I'm Marc, CEO of Frontend Masters, and today we have Charlie Gerard on the podcast. She has a lot of really cool experiments online, from putting on a brain sensor and controlling JavaScript and websites with her mind to hacking a car with JavaScript. She's a really fun person to talk to, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Charlie.
Thanks.
So this is an interview-style podcast. I'll just ask you a series of questions. I know you from your wild experiments online, and we'll definitely get into that.
Okay.
But first, I want to ask you, are there any special skills that you have that people might not know about?
I mean, I have something that comes to mind, but I guess it's probably would only be relevant to like maybe people who have worked or will work with me, is that I have great intuition. So there's like a lot of times where in teams I kind of felt that, either things would happen or that, maybe we shouldn't do this because, I feel like it's not going to work. And sometimes maybe people might not see patterns in things right away. Sometimes if I'm trying to like warn people, they won't believe me. And then the thing happened, I have to stop myself from saying, I told you so. So it's like a skill that's like more for people who hang out with me a lot. Sometimes I do it in movies where I'm like, I think this is going to happen. And like, if somebody's watching the movie with me, I'll probably ruin it for them. But I think it's a skill in terms of like, it's helped me in life a little bit. But yeah, it's not as cool as like probably other skills.
Well, I think there's a book about that, right? Like thinking fast and thinking slow. And it's kind of like the two systems where it's like, you have your gut and it's just like what that initial feeling. But then you have like the logical part of your brain and it's like, but you sound like you have like a...
But sometimes it's hard because sometimes it's like, I'm sure of it, but being able to explain it is like, I'm not ready for that. So people are not really ready to be like, well, why? And things like, I can't really explain how my gut feeling is, but I am often right. So I trust myself. And then if I'm trying to, bring people along with the journey of like when I'm thinking something, but it doesn't always work. So yeah.
Cool. And like, what's your background? Like, where did you grow up and...
I'm originally French. I'm trying to hide the accent, but sometimes people pick it up. Yes, I was born in France. I lived kind of all over the place. I moved to Australia for quite a while. I lived 8 years there. And I worked a little bit in Europe as well and a little bit of the US. So I feel like I'm almost like a mix of a lot of different things, but I was born French. I cannot remove that part. So, yeah.
And then you spent time in Australia, you said? And then,
this is actually where I became a developer. This is where I learned to code. When I was in France, I was studying marketing and advertising. At the time, that's what I thought I wanted to do. Originally, I wanted to be a music supervisor, which is like the people who pick the like soundtrack for ads. And I think I wanted to do that because at the time there was the Apple ads. I don't know if you remember them for iPods where it was in like a bright color background and the silhouette. So I think
like
these
people dancing and then
so these ads made me want to, because sometimes it's like you don't realize how powerful like music is. And sometimes you can just hear the start of a song and you're like, I remember this brand. And because I really like music, I wanted to be the person who would listen to music all day and find new bands and I think Apple would like that or something like that. But usually it's like one person in a team. So that's a very kind of like rare role to be able to have. And when I moved to Australia to finish my master's, there was like an intro class in computer science and I loved it. I just realized like, oh wow, you can write some code and do little interactive stuff. It was using processing at the time. I don't know if you've used processing. And it was really just like a bouncing ball game, so super small. But I loved the fact that I could write a few lines and learn a little bit about if statements and loops and things like that and get something moving on a screen. It felt so amazing, even though it was small. But obviously, I was doing a master's in marketing, so totally not relevant. And then when I started working in Australia, I was in an advertising agency, and I was a project manager. And I was managing some devs who were working with 3JS, like 3D in the browser at the time. And it wasn't as popular as it is now, but I loved what they were doing. And I started by trying to do that on my own time, but it's when you don't know anything about code or very like small amount of stuff, it's really hard to finish work and go home and be like, what do I do now? I didn't even know how to like add a JavaScript to a website. Like I knew how to write HTML tags, but then I was like, well, where does JavaScript go? Like it's now thinking about it, I'm like, well, now I know. But at the time, I just really didn't know. And I took the risk of doing a coding bootcamp. And this is like, that was the start of my journey.
So did you have to quit your job to go full-time to the bootcamp?
Yeah, so that was the risk. And I thought...
And that was in Australia then?
Yeah, that was in Australia as well. So it was 10 years ago. Actually, yes, I started in like February 2014. So like 10 years ago, I was in a classroom with like 8 other people at a time where bootcamps were not popular at all.
So it was like before the bootcamp craze? Or
Yeah. Like now
it's early.
Now it's almost kind of okay, like totally normal to do a bootcamp and then get into tech. But at the time, it was all the companies I wanted to work for were not hiring from bootcamps. But I thought...
But that was kind of the best time because it was like when boot camps were really authentic. It was like the people that really cared about teaching code because it was like there's a time right after that where like boot camps were legitimized and there was a lot of like scams. There whatever.
Was...
So it was like that was the perfect time, I feel like, to actually do a boot camp.
I mean, I learned a lot, but the scary part was that at the end of the boot camp, you had to convince people to hire you.
Yeah, sure.
That was a little bit harder, but I think I got lucky because I think being in Australia, there was more opportunities at the time there. And I mean, I went through normal like hiring process and they took a chance on me and hopefully, and then what was nice is that because I showed them that I could code, then it allowed other people then for like next cohorts of the bootcamp to join the company as well. So I think they realized that, yes, you can learn to code for like 12 weeks, very like intensely, and then get a job and be as functional or like, as like just as good as someone who did a degree. So obviously I had like a huge knowledge gap in other areas, but in terms of getting to work fast on projects, then I could do that. And I think that was enough for them to then, train me on the job, and I had a great mentor at the time. So I'm almost kind of can't believe that was even possible. Like now I feel like at the time even I was thinking, wow, I can learn to code in like 12 weeks. Like what? And I didn't even know if I was going to like it. I struggled a lot in that bootcamp, cried many times about like, I don't understand this or that. And now I'm thinking back and I'm like, why didn't I understand that? So it was, I think it's just the more you learn, sometimes you forget what you didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a great time. I had a lot of fun. And I'm really grateful that it was even an opportunity to get into the industry, because when I was looking, obviously did not have the money to like stop working for 3 to 5 years to get a bachelor or a master's. So the fact that I could spend some money for 3 months and be like, if it doesn't work, I can go back to marketing. It's fine. But the thing is, I loved it.
Did you already have like the degree then? Oh yeah, so
so it was just after. It was just after my master's.
So you already had like the paper, and then you transitioned, and and now you have like the marketing background.
Yes.
And
actually, everything is useful. It's like sometimes people think that if you didn't learn computer science at university, then it's like, too late or something. It's like, no, even my background in marketing, I feel is useful in my day job, even in terms of communication skills and understanding. Even I think, especially if I'm as a front-end developer, thinking about, what might be good for people? What would they want? How would they want to interact? I feel like sometimes I'm using my marketing brain of like thinking about psychology and being like, what are the users' needs and how can I, build for that? So I'm sure you can also have that kind of thinking without doing marketing, but I feel like I don't think of it as like wasted time, what I did before. So.
Absolutely. I think looking back at my career and working with a ton of developers, I think a lot of the more creative ones are the ones that came from like non-traditional backgrounds. Like
I've seen that.
They
as
came
well.
from other industries and then like brought like a different flavor. It's like they're not just thinking about it from like a computer science perspective, but they're thinking about it from like other
different perspectives.
Other industries.
You kind of mix your knowledge of different areas. So
cool. And then given that experience, like, do you have any advice to anybody who's kind of maybe in the early part of the career, like transitioning into development?
I mean, I think to me, the thing that really set me on the right path, in my opinion, is that in my first job, I had a great mentor. And it was someone who made me comfortable. And in the job that I was, my very first job, there was a lot of pair programming. So maybe that's also what really helped me, is that he was a senior engineer. And I used, at the time, before I was an engineer, I used to be very uncomfortable asking questions. So he really helped me make me feel like I wasn't stupid for not knowing something. And it was really nice to be interacting with him, and I learned a lot from him, and we're still friends. Sometimes when I go back to Australia, I just message him and we grab coffee, and it's like, well, what are you up to now and stuff. So it's nice. It's been almost 10 years and we're still friends because he was a great mentor. And so, my advice would be to, if you can find a place where you have good mentorship, or if you can feel like you're safe asking questions, I would totally try to find that kind of area. And if it's not on your job, but you can find a community of friends or online where you can feel safe to ask questions and explore things without feeling stupid. It's something that I would recommend because that's what I did, and I always followed what felt right for me, which then, led me on the creative path and stuff like that. But I know that sometimes, I guess when you try to get your first job, there's some people who try to get the most money right away or work for the biggest company. And I don't know if you were going for Google right away, I don't know if you would get the mentorship. I don't work there, so I don't want to, I don't want to say anything bad. But I feel like if during the interviews you can ask if you can get mentorship, or if you can get really a vibe from the people you're going to work with, that you're going to be comfortable with them. To me, that's the most important, because as you're growing, there's so much to learn when you're a junior, that if you don't feel comfortable asking questions, it's probably going to impact like the rest of your journey in tech.
I'd say the most common theme, I think, in people that I've seen who have had really accelerated careers is they took each job, not necessarily, like you said, for the pay. And yes, obviously you can think about it that way. Like you want to get paid more with each role, but it's really about like what you can learn. Yes. It's like I stand to learn a lot from this next role.
Yes.
And like people who value learning over some of the other driving factors, definitely have like really long, fulfilling careers rather than, I mean, it's the thing is you don't know what's going to be good for you when you start. Yeah. I think the good thing as well is that my first job was in a consultancy. Mm-hmm. So it was basically we're working in teams, and it was kind of changing every 6 months, different clients, different technologies, different projects. But there's trade-offs to that. It's like there's a moment where I think I did that for about 4.5 years. And that then I ended up thinking, well, I have nothing that I'm sure is like finished, because you do a project at a client and then you leave and you kind of have nothing to show because you could have left and they replaced everything. So after that period of like when I learned a lot from different technologies, sometimes I was thrown into a project and like I didn't even know the framework. And it was this very scary moment, but also it kind of pushes you to like be like, okay, well, tomorrow I'm writing in Ember.js. All right, okay, let's go. And it was really scary. But it's almost when you're put into a situation when you have no choice. And it was actually really fun. Yeah. That's so scary. That's fun as well. But then there became a point where I wanted to build something that was more long-term. And then I moved more into like project, a product work. Yeah. So more of like where I could be able to say, no, I built this and it's still there. Yeah. So similarly, like when I got into the industry, I had a job at a agency where I was working really long weeks and I was put on new projects constantly, but I got exposed to like all of these different people and teams and tech stacks, and it was just like incredible, like in my 20s, like just having that experience of just like soaking up all the knowledge. It's and
huge opportunity.
So it was definitely a lot of work, but it was really, really good. But and then with Frontend Masters, now I've been working on the same essentially the same thing for like over a decade, and yeah, it's working on the same general concept and building on it like is definitely like more fulfilling. But I would say that time period was like extremely fun.
I think there's benefits to both. I know people who started with product and then went into consultancy and different, but I think it's like whatever you take out of different jobs. But even the idea of sometimes I was working for banks, and then sometimes working for government, and sometimes working for a startup. And I think that helped me then decide later on what type of company I wanted to work for. So it's not only a tech stack, it's also just a domain in general. Like
team, culture, all those
exactly.
kinds of things.
So to me, I feel like it was a great first experience.
Yeah. So the first time I saw you, I think you had like I saw a video, you had like a brain crown device, brain reading device, and you're like controlling something with JavaScript. Anyways, we'll definitely get into that project, but like those experiments that you've kind of shared, I've definitely seen like a lot of them. So I wanted to go go through a few of them and maybe talk through your process.
Okay.
The most recent one I saw was that you hacked a car with JavaScript. Could you talk?
Did,
Could you talk about that?
Sure. So where can I start? So it didn't start like I didn't wake up one day and being like, let's hack cars. It's always like kind of like gradually. I think it started because I wanted to learn more about what's called SDR, so software defined radio. So it's how you actually have a radio that's most of like a software, and you buy like a little antenna. And the very first project was to track live data from airplanes. And that was more of like I replicated a project that someone else had created, but I just made it more just front-end. I think he had created in Node.js, and I wanted to try to get it to work with the WebUSB API. And once I got that to work, I was thinking, okay, what else can I do with an antenna? What kind of data can I get and things like that? And by doing some research, I realized that, well, when you use a key fob to open your car, it does send, radio signals to your car, and you can intercept that and things like that. So I slowly started to move on thinking, can that even work in JavaScript? And at first I just started with like a doorbell at home. I bought a doorbell that uses not an internet connected doorbell or anything. It's a doorbell with a little kind of remote thing, and you press a button, it sends like a radio frequency signal to the doorbell. And I started just with that, trying to pick up the signal, and then if I replay it replayed to the doorbell. And I was like, okay, so I can record a signal in JavaScript. So by plugging a little antenna to my computer and using the WebUSB API and connect that. And if I get the signal and then I replay it, then it works. But the thing is, if you want to try to, I know my ultimate goal was to try to hack a car, but I knew that if you work with a car that's after 1990, then they have what's called the rolling codes. So even if you record a signal while it's being played, then if you try to replay, it's not going to work because the code has changed. So I knew that I had to implement a new feature in what I was building that's called more I had to jam the car's receiver while I'm recording the signal from the key fob, and I'm keeping that signal, and then I'm replaying it. And that was really fun because it's also just client-side JavaScript. There's no server or anything. It uses the WebUSB. So I have two devices connected to my computer. I connect both of them using the WebUSB API. And then one of them is transmitting to the car's receiver, so jamming it, so that and the other one is listening. So when I'm pressing the key fob to open or lock the car, the receiver is recording the data in a local file, and while the other one is jamming the car, so it's not opening even though I'm pressing. And then once I have that local file on my computer, I'm able to load it in the browser and hit transmit with the antenna that's close to the car's antenna. And because that code has not been used on the car yet, then the car is almost waiting for that specific code. And then boom, open the car. I mean, in the way that it works, obviously, I think in a real world scenario, you'd have to be close to the car exactly at the moment when the person, presses on the button. So I know that I do not want to use it to actually hack cars. It was just to show the amount of stuff that you can do with JavaScript, really. That was my only goal. I don't need a car, but yeah. So.
Seemed like a cool thing you could demo at DEF CON or something.
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Then, so there's also one that detected you running. So I think that was, you built that during the pandemic or something, right?
I did.
So it's
yeah. And
like running, and it's kind of like playing a video as you're running.
yeah, I mean, well, yes, at the time people were saying like, don't go out or things like this. And also I lived in Amsterdam when I built this, so they were not really, I mean, I could have run in the street, but it's not as fun as like running in a forest or something. So then I realized that on YouTube you have these videos of people who have filmed their own like runs, and you can just play. So I thought, well, I can like fake that I'm in the forest. Like I just had my laptop that I projected on a wall. And I actually used TensorFlow.js for this. And what was interesting is that I started thinking, well, what does that mean to run in the context of just getting key points of where my body is, like, 2D space. So it uses the camera. And I was thinking, okay, well, when you run, usually like your arms are like this. So it's like, okay, my wrist is above my elbow and then my ankles are like higher and stuff. So it was kind of thinking about the logic of like, what does it mean to run in terms of where my body is? And then, using machine learning to detect that. And if I'm running, then it plays the video because I'm running in the forest. And if I get tired and I, stop running, then it stops it. So if I want to finish the video, I have to keep running. It was just a way of like staying active, basically. So
that's awesome. There was one with, I do want to get into the brain scan device. So then, the one where you put this device on and then you can kind of control the screen. Like, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I used maybe a couple of brain sensors. The very first one I used was like an emotive epoch. I think, I don't remember what year it was, but it was actually, I started coding this shortly after I finished my bootcamp. So maybe 2016. And the first, at the time, there was no JavaScript framework for it. I think it was just in Java or Python. But I love the web and I wanted to try to, make it work in JavaScript. So I created my own framework. That took me a long time. Not because it was necessarily difficult, but because I was still very junior and I had no idea what I was doing. So it was more like, I try a little bit, it doesn't work, and I pause for a few months and I try again. And the first time that it worked, I just had a basic scene in Three.js where I had trained the device to recognize my thought of like going right or going left, and I was just adding that to the Three.js scene, so just like right and left. But then there was this new device called the Neurocity Notion. And this one is more fun because I think they wanted to create it for JavaScript devs first. So the SDK was in JavaScript. And it's much nicer to use. And they give you access to raw data. So with the previous example, if you wanted to create your own machine learning model with it, you'd have to pay like a monthly fee. And I thought, I'm just doing weekend projects. I don't want to like pay, like I'm not a research center or anything. So I moved on to the Neurocity Notion, and from there they kind of had the same concept of you can train different thoughts in their interface. There's a pre-selected list of thoughts, and it's thoughts about movements. So it could be like tapping your right foot or tapping your left foot. And when you have these gestures trained and you can like test them in the browser, then you can do whatever you want with it. So you could play a game, or I think I just replaced like the dino game instead of pressing the space bar. I'm like thinking, but it's interesting because if you're playing a game, you might want the latency to be really low. And with that kind of things, the latency is a little bit longer. You can't really it's hard to think about, well, what does it mean to think left in terms of like raw brain data. So there's always a little bit of latency for the machine learning model to figure out really like based on live brain data, what does that mean and what kind of gesture is it matching with. So I've tested it more with maybe, I wouldn't pair that with like a car. Like I wouldn't drive with a brain. I mean, like maybe later, but right now it's like I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild that you've been playing with that type of equipment since like 2016. I don't even think that I knew that even existed back then. I
mean, I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but it must have just been like Googled, or I think it's because I started with other devices of like, I had like a Mayo armband that doesn't exist anymore, but it had sensors for like muscle things. And I think the more I build projects, the more I had this thought of like, well, what's next? Like, what else can I do? And then I stumbled upon I think at first it was a very smaller like brain sensor that wasn't really accurate. I even forgot the name of it now. But then I was like, oh, brain sensors exist. And then I, Googled. There was one as well that I have that I never really used that was called OpenBCI. I don't know if you heard of it. It was more of like an open source. So you had the brain sensor was 3D printed. And then you could assemble it yourself. It hurt more because it was really like spikes that are just like almost like, because you have to have like nice contact with your actual skull.
Wow.
So some of the brain sensors you have to add some kind of like gel. And at least with the NeuroCity Notion, the spikes are more like rounded, so they don't really like stab you or anything. And it's not as heavy. It's more flexible, so it like kind of adapts more to your head. But yeah, I tried a few things.
So if you've been interested in this stuff for a long time, like, have you seen the whole where they actually planted the computer inside the paraplegic person, and like he's playing a video game until like 6 a.m. because he's so excited? That
scares me. I mean, I'm glad that people are looking into this. I'm a little bit skeptical, but because I also know that sometimes the way companies record demos, then it's like it's only when it worked, and things like that. I just hope that the person who has this implant is okay, because I know that when they tried it on monkeys, they died. So I just hope that it's gonna be all right. But the thing is, I think that usually it might work for specific actions. For example, if you target the parts of the brain that are responsible for thinking about movements, then yes, sure. But if you, we still don't really know exactly where other thoughts might come from. If I'm thinking about the beach or the feeling of the sun on my skin, it's not really like a region of the brain that's dedicated to that. So when we're thinking about implants, it's like, yes, for movement, I could see it totally work if you target the parts of the brain that are responsible for that. But for the rest, if we're really thinking about, I can just think about controlling my computer and it will do it, I feel like maybe there's a way that one day it will work, but probably not right now. There needs to be more.
Yeah. I think it's definitely. I think my gut reaction is always like, it gives you a little bit of the ick. Like, right?
I'm not ready. I'm not going. I love technology and stuff, but I'm not going to get an implant.
Especially like reading. Like the mind doesn't somehow, like, I feel like that's almost inevitable, but the writing really scares me.
I mean, yeah. And even the thing is that
you could like rewrite thoughts, right?
But how would that even work? And there's a certain amount of data that your brain can process at a time. So if you really like jam it, then what? You just like faint? Like, I don't know how that would work, but I'm not necessarily a fan of.
Like weaponize any sort of like weaponization. Like, especially, I mean, like phones get hacked all the time, now we're starting to see cars getting hacked, and I mean, you even like, I mean,
I'm not even a real hacker, and I did it. So it's I mean, even when people were talking about pacemakers can be hacked and stuff, so like not cool. So I wouldn't really. I think we're not there yet. I'll let maybe whoever wants to try it, I'll let them try, but I would want to really be sure that it doesn't impact long term or other aspects of.
You're not going to be the first one to sign up.
No, not for that one. No,
not for that one. No. But it sounds like the was it you said Neurosity?
Yeah, Neurocity Notion is
pretty
the one
cool to
play
with.
I realize. I think I love the fact that they access to live like raw data means that then you can make your own model out of it as well. So you don't have to necessarily train it with the thoughts that they say you can train. You can try your own and see what happens. And I love that. It's kind of open to experimentation.
Very cool. So. And how did you get into like machine learning in general?
So
you wrote a book on it?
I mean, I know. I never thought I would. But I think it started with brain sensors, actually. I think it's at the time when I was switching from the old one that was more closed source to the NeuroCity Notion, I was thinking, oh, well, now I have access to live data. So at some point, I should learn machine learning. But I don't think that TensorFlow.js was available at the time. So I thought, oh, well, I'm going to have to learn Python. So the way that I got into machine learning was actually doing an online tutorial, and it was using scikit-learn. Don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like a Python library that allows you to like do machine learning relatively easily, and it taught me the basics. And then I think they launched TensorFlow.js, and I was like, ooh, well, now I can just go back to JavaScript. And the more I learned about it, I learned about the different features and the different models. And then once you understand what you can do, then you can have a lot of different ideas and stuff. And I wanted to write a book about it because there was not that many resources at the time, and I really wanted to go and like a project-based kind of teaching where it was like, oh, well, at the end of this, you'll have like concrete, example of like, you've done this or you've done that. And then, let people's imagination like take over and build whatever they want to build. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then like, how did you get into kind of speaking and teaching and that kind of thing?
I think I remember my first conference, and that was totally random. I don't even know how the organizer found me. I think I just received an email one day about a conference that was in Manchester, and I think it was called Upfront Conf. I don't think it's running anymore, but my first talk was more about creative coding in general. I think at the time I was probably sharing on Twitter experiments with 3JS or P5JS or things like that. And I was a lot more into visual things. And I started my first conference, my first talk was with my best friend. We were kind of like submitted a talk, the two of us, probably because I was scared to do it on my own. So I was like, do it with me. And she was like a lot more creative than me. So we did it together. And from there, I think that I started applying to conferences and being like, oh, well, maybe, with the brain sensor stuff, or maybe that'd be interesting, because when I was looking at the schedules for conferences, I didn't really see things like that. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll try and see what happens. And yeah, then I still was not comfortable speaking, but I thought, well, submitting to the CFP doesn't do, like, I'm not committing, I'm just submitting, and then I'll deal with the stress later. If they say no, great. And if they say yes, then I'll probably do it because I'll feel pressured. So I put myself again in a situation where I knew because of guilt that I would say yes, even if they were selecting the proposal. And I kind of started from there. When they selected, I was like, oh no, like I'm going to speak in front of hundreds of people. What am I going to do? But then, I rehearsed a lot. And the first few talks, they're probably online. I don't want to watch them anymore because that probably would be, it's like when you watch your old code, I probably don't want to see that.
My first talk is online. Yeah. Somebody uploaded an archive from like 2004, and I'm very ashamed of it.
Sometimes,
nobody find it.
Sometimes Please. You have these flashbacks from 10 years ago. Yeah. It's like in my dreams, it's haunting me.
Yeah.
And I think you get more comfortable over time, and you kind of find your style. And you go from there. But again, it's only if I feel like I built something I want to talk about, then I talk about it. Otherwise, I only want to share something that I built. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, any advice for folks who are maybe thinking about teaching and speaking?
Sure. I would say just do it. I think it's the same thing as, I feel like usually people are thinking, I don't know what to talk about. And I feel like everybody has maybe a different perspective on things. Sometimes you could take the perspective of, well, I'm a junior and this didn't make sense. And you want to talk about maybe your experience, trying something for the first time, and maybe you can help senior developers create better documentation or something. That could be an angle. Or it could be you use the tool that you haven't seen many people use, and you could do like an intro to a new tool, a new framework or something like that. So I know that it's very easy to think, I don't know what to say, because I even think that sometimes. I'm like, well, I have nothing to talk about. And then when you actually maybe sit down and look at the things you've built or the things you're reading or the things you don't know about, then you actually realize, actually, I do have stuff to talk about. And then, writing a proposal can take some time. I've been rejected as well, and sometimes you tweak it and you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't the right audience, or maybe that wasn't the right title, and you kind of like switch over time, and you can ask your friends to review if they want to do that. But it's I wouldn't, if you get rejected, I wouldn't take it as like, oh, that's it, I'll never be speaking at a conference. It's more like, well, maybe that wasn't the right fit, but you can try again. I still get rejected now, and I've been speaking for like 6 years or something. So sometimes it just doesn't work. But if you're excited and you really want to do it, sometimes just tweaking a little bit. Either the type of conference or the title or the abstract, or sometimes they just had a lot of great proposals and it just happened that you were just under or something. So I would say try it and see what happens.
Yeah, it's good advice. Do you have anything like on the horizon career-wise or even personal that you're like really excited about?
I think career-wise, I'm starting to wonder if I want to explore things in like another language than JavaScript. I think I've done a lot with JavaScript, and on the web, it still will be something that I love. But sometimes I'm thinking, I want to learn Go or Rust, like things that are just totally different and that I don't know, and see if there's anything creative that I can do with that. I just know that I probably will stay in more of like a technical position. I don't think I would want to be a manager, so that is probably not on the horizon for me. But yeah, and in terms of personal life, I always try to do things that scare me and then I regret it and then I feel good about it. So it's like I was trying to learn to be a pilot. I started and then I had to put it on pause. But the thing is I hate flying. And then I was like, well, what about I become a pilot? So it's like in progress. But I like to put myself in situations where I regret it for like a second and then I'm like, well, I'm in it, so let's just do it. And I feel like that expands where my boundaries are. And then I get to do like interesting stuff. So
yeah, I definitely feel that. Like I'm going on stage this weekend, dancing. And that's pretty, wild and scary. But yeah, I mean, it's what keeps life interesting.
I mean, you realize that nothing bad will probably happen, and then you'll be able to be like, that wasn't that bad. And then it will be like the next. I mean, sometimes bad things can happen, but most of the time, what's scary is probably not going to happen. Like, even if everybody laughs at you, then I don't know. It's like, well, that's it. It's not the worst thing ever. And, you might fail here and there, but at least you tried and you learned stuff. And I love pushing myself a little bit more. I'll still have like boundaries that I won't cross, but I love thinking like, well, if other people have done it, then I can do it too. And yeah, try stuff like that.
And I do have to pitch the fact that like, you get a Frontend Masters account from being a teacher, and we have like a really awesome Go course that's dropping next week, and we have a couple other Go and Rust courses on the platform.
Well,
so
I probably need them. So
I feel like I have to at least throw them in there. But yeah, any other like crazy like bucket list things that you kind of have in the horizon, or you're like, I just really want to do that?
Well, I feel like when I really want to do something, I end up taking steps to do it. So later this year, I signed up for like a kind of like week-long trip to climb the highest mountain in Europe. It's
Really?
the Mont Blanc. Yeah, I was so excited.
Awesome.
And I love mountains in general, but I've been to like the place in France where the Mont Blanc is, like in the Alps, and I've been looking at the top of the Mont Blanc from like afar. But there were kind of like expeditions with a group of people, so I'm gonna go with people I've never met before, and we're gonna hike for like 6 days. We're gonna do Mount Paradiso, I think, first as like a warm up.
Yeah, it's like
and then
I was wondering like what kind of training you have to do prior.
So I've had to life has been a bit intense. So in terms of training, it's mostly been like a bit of cardio and like because you're gonna lose oxygen as you go up. So trying to train a bit of cardio and just trying to like. I need to hike more probably to have like stronger legs. And there's a moment where I probably need to hike or to even be on a treadmill with actual like weight, because I've been on a treadmill, but I haven't actually used like a
weighted vest.
So I probably need to do that a bit more. But I've never done this before. I have no training in mountaineering, so I'm just gonna be like, let's go. And yeah, I don't know who the people are that I'm gonna go with, and I just hope the weather's gonna be good, because if it's not good, it's gonna be dangerous to go to the top. But I'm feeling already that it's gonna be awesome if the weather is good to get to the top of the highest mountain in Europe and with a group of strangers and be like, we did it, and being able to like look around. And I mean, even from not the top, like I love this place, it's beautiful, but really thinking like I climbed to the top of like a freaking mountain. So that's probably gonna be, if it goes well, it's probably might be my first of many. We'll see. But again, it was like a random idea that I had. I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's possible. And then do some research and you realize that, you just pay for an expedition with a group of people and you just go. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's awesome. Yeah, like hiking mountains is like one of my favorite things. Well, me and my wife's favorite things in the world. So, wish you luck with that. And
if I come back,
I'm sure you'll be like tweeting about it or something. So I'll definitely. Yeah. So. That's awesome. Do you have any like, maybe like themes when you look back at your career? Like, you're like, I always do this, and it seems to work out.
It's going to make sense for me when I say it, but I always do what I think is right for me, even if I know that people might make fun of me or might not understand my choices. And I don't know if it will make sense by just like hearing me say that, but I know that even building creative projects, when I was starting, I had a lot of people being like, why do you do this? Like, it's useless, learn React instead. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm learning React as part of my job. But to me, being an engineer is like, well, I have to know about everything that's possible. And then I can make the best decision. And I kept doing what I thought was right and what was exciting for me. Because first of all, I can't do something I don't want to do. I really struggle to, I don't think I could spend my own time learning about things that would only be useful for a job. I could do it for a bit if I really needed to build something. But with knowing the amount of energy that sometimes it takes to really debug something or learn something, I'd rather do something that's exciting for me. So even if I have to use a framework that's not necessarily known to be creative, I try to find an angle that gets me excited. And I know that a lot of people don't understand this or don't like it or whatever. But it has worked for me, and it's led me to where I am today. And I've had a lot of opportunities just from people seeing something I shared on Twitter. And I've sometimes used some of the skills I've learned doing creative things like on the job. And I think that sometimes people think in like short-term thinking of like, well, what's useful right now? And it's like, yeah, okay, that works. But I feel like even though I've learned things that I might not have made an entire career out of, I feel like I know more broadly what's possible with technology, and I feel excited, and I feel like maybe I have more of like a unique angle about what can be done, and I feel like I've had fun along the way. So I know it's hard sometimes to keep doing things when you have people telling you like, that's useless, or like, that's like silly and stuff, but I like it. Like, I don't know. I like doing that. Maybe you can do other stuff. So sometimes it's like pushing back against what people tell you. And if it feels right, I do that. But it also requires knowing yourself and also being maybe brave. And maybe brave is the word, I don't know. But just brave enough to be like, maybe other people are wrong and I'm right. I don't know. To me, if it brings me joy and it gets me excited, then I've already won something. I don't necessarily need to be useful for other things. Like, I love what I do, and I feel like that's already enough. So if people are listening or watching this and they really want to do something and somebody's telling them that's useless, then do it like anyway, if you can. You never know what you're going to get out of. And when people tell you it's useless, they're usually thinking about what's useful right now, but you never know what's going to come. So yeah.
So it's like, listen to your gut.
Yeah.
And
intuition. I said it.
Yeah. Listen to your gut, be brave, and ignore the haters.
Basically, it's hard. I know I still get haters. So it's, I'm not immune to it, but I'm like, ugh. I think over time it used to affect me more. And now I'm just like, oh, you're boring. And I just move on. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. So
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey there, before you go, don't forget we're new at this. So any feedback, whether it's a like or subscribe, we'll take those, or a comment about what you didn't like or what you'd like to see more of in the future. We'll definitely incorporate that into the next episodes. I'm really enjoying these conversations. So any type of feedback would be fantastic, and especially sharing it with your friends and colleagues. So really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.